Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to this 150 Years of Newnham virtual event. I'm Rita Clifton. I'm a proud and very grateful Newnham alumna from the dark ages of the late 1970s. And I'm delighted to have been asked to chair this particular session, which, as you'll see, is focused on women in business. And I've got a fabulous group of women who are here to share their stories and their experiences, their learnings, and indeed their tips for a wide range of businesses and also organisations. And also, I'm very happy to say, from a wide range of Newnham generations. Now, each of our panelists is going to give a bit of an opening gambit about their respective stories. We don't have journeys, obviously, on this panel, but by way of a few brief introductions, I'm very pleased to introduce Pam Alexander at OBE, who I'm relieved to say actually matriculated before me. Pam has had a glittering career in both public and private sectors, including a stint as Chief Executive of English Heritage and also as Chair of the Design Council. It also says in Wikipedia that Pam's interests outside of that are choral singing and tennis, so it must be true. Until a few years ago, Pam was also President of the Newnham Roll Committee. Now, at the other end of the Newnham generation is Han-Lin Xu, who matriculated only 10 years ago and, to the envy of us all, I think, is currently employed at Bloom and Wild. And previously, Han-Lin worked in startups and also large companies too, and did her MBA in Paris. She's also fantastically good at the piano, apparently. So there we are, maybe a bit later. And somewhere in between the time machine are Mary Jawira and Susanna Kemp, who both matriculated in the mid-1980s. Mary has spent a great part of her career in banking and strategy and is now a non-executive director. She also trained as an accountant, which I have to say secretly, I wish I had done too. And Susanna has spent a lot of her career in marketing as chief executive of the Trends organisation WGSN, and now is chief executive of an educational charity. So again, welcome to everyone. If I could just now come to each of our panelists in turn to give a little 2-minute potted history. So your story about how you ended up doing what you're doing, and also how Newnham has played a role, however indirectly, in that experience. So Pam, if I could please come to you, please, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Rita. And as you so kindly said, I'm even more ancient than you are. So 50 years in 2 minutes, doddle, really. Well, I should have been a barrister if it hadn't been for my careers advisory service in 1971 at a girls' public day school, who said it absolutely wasn't a job for a woman. It was far too long a training, and I'd had children, and what a waste of money that would have been. Well, as Carol said, you don't have to have one predictable career anymore. So I chose to read geography. I also chose to go to Clare, but Clare didn't choose me. So I've always been a great proponent of how wonderful the pool system is, as I was pooled and called by Newnham. And I couldn't have been happier about that. The first women in the first 3 men's colleges had a bloody awful time, and I had an absolutely lovely one. In the 1970s, I think we all wanted to do things that were good for society. The concept of making money wasn't really something that was particularly interesting. And my director of studies, Lucy Adrian, showed me the possibilities for the many layers of place, and gave me a love of place, which led to the tree that I think Carol Black would describe my career as, where the core, the trunk of that tree was loving place, loving the built environment. And I spent 20 years as a civil servant, and then a senior civil servant in the Department of the Environment, dealing with housing, local government, transport. But after 20 years of making policies, and I decided I actually wanted to do something. So I joined the Housing Corporation and ran the housing programme, which was probably my favourite job ever. I wanted to deliver things on the ground or help them to be delivered. And as Rita said, I moved from there to be Chief Exec of English Heritage, though actually that was a disaster rather than a success, which we might come to later. I enjoyed it. It was a bit dramatic, but I enjoyed it. And I became Chief Exec of the South East England Development Agency after that. But when that was abolished by the Cameron government, I thought, this government is not going to give this, in quotes, in the Daily Mail, Quango Queen, another job. So since 2011, I've had a non-executive portfolio across all the sectors, really. I chair a digital small company, and I've been on a FTSE 250 house builder. I've chaired a charity, Peabody, and I was actually deputy chair of the Design Council. And I'm now chair of the planning committee at the London Legacy Development Corporation, which is the Olympic Park. All of this really, I think, comes from the love of place that was generated by my studies with Lucy. I'm also perhaps most interested now in the mentoring I do for women's leadership courses. I'm on the steering group of Equilibrium, as is another Newnhamite who spoke earlier today, Alice Muncaster. And I'm really focusing at the moment on how we make places which women and girls enjoy and feel safe in, focusing on the inclusive aspects of women's power. And that's what's exciting me. And I'm sure that's because of the sisterhood that I enjoyed here.
Fantastic. That's number of years in 2 minutes. So that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Pam. And you do get points for saying the first swear word actually on this panel. So
great.
So maybe we're going to hold that thought and have a swear box at the end. I don't know. So thank you very much. If I can now come, please, to Hanlin.
Yeah, and thank you, Rita, and thank you, Pam. And so my name is Hanling, and I'm currently a lead insight analyst at Bloom Wild. It's an online letterbox flower/plants company. Before that, I was a customer insight analyst in a massive fintech company and a product analyst in a second-hand ticketing startup. During my years at Newnham as an engineering student, I was always unsure of what career to get into and whether my CV was good enough or not. But I would always attend sessions and talks organized by the Newnham Associates. It's a group of alumni in different walks of life and careers, offering advice to students and graduates. From them, I not only learned about how to best format my CV, but also the importance of building up a variety in experiences by trying out different things, really. The other day, I actually searched my inbox and found out the email exchange with me and Miri. I think, yeah, it's actually really lovely. So Newnham College has really supported me in that way, and also they supported me on my volunteering teaching trip in West Kenya and my summer language school in Paris. So with this spirit, after graduation, I gave up a really good, secure job opportunity as a software engineer in BT to join Collège des Ingénieurs in Paris to do my MBA. And that was where I developed my interest in product and analytics and customer insights. So therefore, I'm forever grateful for the advice I received at Newnham, and I'm very excited to share my experience and thoughts with everybody today.
Fantastic. That's great to hear about the Newnham community. I guess in some ways your experience couldn't be more different from Pam's, actually. I'm sure we'll come to lots of things in between. And by the way, this is a vulgar sell on Bloom and Wild letterbox flowers. If anyone hasn't tried them yet, I'm a huge fan. They've exactly changed a lot of our lives, I think. So thank you very much, Hannah. If I can come now to Mary with your opening remarks, please.
Yes, thank you, Rita. And it's lovely to be part of this event. So I was one of the many students at Newnham who don't know what they want to do. I actually arrived, I read natural sciences at Newnham, and when I arrived, I thought I was going to be an academic scientist. And actually one of the things I learned at Newnham was that I wasn't actually going to become an academic scientist. I probably worked that out probably in my first year, certainly by middle of the second. And so when I graduated, I still hadn't worked out what I wanted to do. And Rita said that I'm an accountant, and I just drifted into it, to be honest. It was just something that other people were doing. I liked maths, I was a scientist, I was quite analytical, and I went off and did accountancy, not really knowing why, but having a sense that it was always going to be a good background. And I definitely think it is a good background. I do think being able to read a set of accounts is one of the most valuable and actually one of the most exciting things you can do, because accounts actually never lie. So they're very interesting if you want to understand an organization. And then after that, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And a friend of mine was applying for jobs in banking. So I thought I'd apply for jobs in banking, and I got a job in banking. So I went off and did it. And I actually had a wonderful time. A lot of people, haven't had a good time in banking, but I did. It really, really opened my horizons. And I do think this ties back to something I learnt at Newnham. When I was at Newnham, it was a very diverse place. It's even more diverse now. It's people from all over the world, all backgrounds, all different subjects, all different personalities. And we all just broadly got on with each other, and you made a lot of friends. And I do think that was that approach of just accepting people. You're living in a community with them and they're very different from you, but you just accept them and you get on and you make friends. That approach, which I think is very much part of the spirit of Newnham, was something I learned, and I carried it through into my into the careers I worked in and the companies I worked for. And then after a bit of time in banking, I decided I wanted to do strategy. Strategy is a nice word for sort of trying to predict the future. And as you can imagine, if you're trying to predict the future, more than 50% of the time you're wrong. But it is fun trying to predict it. And so I now am really a strategist, and I work with a number of different organizations on doing that. And I think looking back, as I say, the things I learned from Newnham are, as I mentioned, being part of a community and the sense of just accepting that anyone you meet is a friend, a potential friend, if you get to know them. And the other thing I learned is I learned that there were things that I would actually not do. So, for example, I learned I wasn't going to be an academic scientist, which is what I had thought I was going to do when I arrived at Newnham. And then I discovered I wasn't going to do it. And I think Newnham taught me to try things out. And sometimes in trying them out, you'll learn that they're not for you. And that's as valuable a lesson as trying something out and discovering it is for you. So Newnham gave me a bit of a sense of adventure, of trying things out and not minding if the end result was it wasn't for me. That in itself was just as valuable as learning the things that were for me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All sorts of great insights there. I'm sure will resonate from people on the call. Who really did know what they wanted to do when they left Newnham, and indeed people who are at Newnham at the moment, even now. I wonder how many people do know what they want to do. Learning to accept people, trying things out, all these are really fantastic insights. And also reading a set of accounts is exciting. I think we need to remember where we heard that first.
Yes.
And actually, a big part of me, I totally agree, the language of the boardroom, whether we like it or not, is still finance. And so if you can't speak that language in some way, shape or form, you either won't be there or won't make as much impact. So actually it's a fantastically useful skill. And actually even Mary Beard, back to that later, I know Dame Mary also agrees that learning numbers to make an impact in boardrooms of all sorts of organisations is fundamentally important. So maybe we can come back to that a bit later. Thank you very much, Mary. Susanna, can I come to you now, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was definitely in the category of having no idea what I wanted to do when I left university. And I'd read English and loved every moment of it. So I thought something vaguely creative, maybe I'd go into publishing. And then the more research I did around publishing, I realized that actually it involved a lot of administration and being terribly organized, neither of which are my strong suits to this day. So I applied for marketing jobs instead, thinking, well, that's quite creative. You'll probably have to do some writing, probably involve some numbers, and I quite liked that side of things. So I started applying for the sort of graduate schemes with the big FMCG companies. Got through to the second round with Procter & Gamble, with Mars. Both of them rejected me outright for not being tough enough or aggressive enough, which of course I suspect now probably just meant not being enough of a lad or enough of the sort of the picture of who they were looking for. So instead, I went to work for then a very small conference and training company called IIR, which grew to be the largest training and conference company in the world. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that growth. So when we eventually sold the business, I was its chief marketing officer. And we sold it to Informa, who's a FTSE 100 big media publishing company. And I became chief marketing officer and investor relations director of Informa. Later, I ran various media businesses, including, as Rita mentioned, I was the CEO of WGSN, which is the world's leading trend forecaster. But today I've gone full circle, and I'm actually now running the Laidlaw Foundation, which Lord Laidlaw founded as a means of giving back, having been successful as an entrepreneur and growing IIR and selling it. At the time when we sold it, it was the largest private sale in the UK. So the Laidlaw Foundation actually invests in the education of the underprivileged and the underrepresented. And women absolutely fall into that underrepresented category. So we have 3 different programs that we run. One is sponsoring schools in the northeast of England. So we have a large multi-academy trust, which I'm also chair of. We run scholarship programs at a dozen of the world's leading universities, and we sponsor women to complete their MBAs at Oxford Said and London Business School. So having had the huge opportunities that Newnham gave me, I have always been very conscious that not all women have that privilege. So to give back and really help other women receive the kind of education that I received is fantastic. And I feel very fortunate to have the job that I do.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's sort of making sure the ladder is down for everybody else is a fundamentally important part of what we need to do, isn't it? And actually, I think we've all had some sort of advice about not being tough enough. You know, nice guys don't finish last, all that rubbish that is very depressing. Jacinta Ardern for world president, I think, probably seems to give the lie to those sort of comments. Thank you very much indeed. And I guess we've touched on some of these things already, but just thinking about all the experiences that collectively we've had and thinking about some of the highest points and maybe the lowest points and what we might have learned from some of those, either, you know, difficult lessons or amazing lessons or whatever. And maybe actually I can almost come in reverse order. Susanna, are you happy to share maybe, and we're moving into the sort of 1-minute responses ideally, if we can sort of squeeze them up so we can get as many comments in as possible. Sure. Highest points, lowest points maybe in your working life.
Well, I think probably combined. The highest point was when I was made CEO of WGSN, because it wasn't a sector I knew. I didn't know fashion, I didn't know retail, and it was the most amazing opportunity. The lowest point was then, or at least it felt like it at the time, was when the group CEO, my boss, David Gilbertson, left the business. And we had to the private equity company, Apax, who owned us at the time, were then deciding who to appoint to replace him. And they didn't interview any of us who were that sort of next tier down in the senior team. And so we were waiting and waiting to discover who his replacement was going to be. And they appointed someone who was absolutely the diametric opposite of David in pretty much every way. So I sort of thought that probably didn't bode too well. And I started telling the HR director that, you know, I would completely understand if he wanted to bring in his own people and what it would take for me to sort of disappear off the scene. And sure enough, I was his 9 a.m. meeting on his very first day in the company. And at the time, I had a joint role. I was the CEO of WGSN, but I was also the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer of the group company of EMAP. And he told me that he was making my joint role redundant. So I could apply for either one or the other. So I could apply to be the CEO of WHSN, or I could apply to be the Chief Marketing Strategy Officer of the combined business, but I couldn't carry on what I was doing. And the slight sort of hiccup that came with that was that my salary would also be halved because I would only be doing one job, not two. So that didn't sound terribly appealing. So since he happily said, in terms of redundancy package, all the things I'd mentioned to the HR director I would like to disappear off quietly, I said, absolutely fine, I'm going to go. Went and said goodbye to my senior team, packed up my stuff, walked down to my car in the garage, sat there and wept, because I just thought this was my dream job. I loved it. And I felt so guilty that, I was leaving my team, and I thought, we were doing this amazing thing together and the company was growing, and I was just devastated. And of course I was wrong on every level, right? That the team were absolutely fine without me. The people who didn't really like the new culture and the new direction had amazing CVs because they'd been part of this, success story. So they quickly ran off and got other great jobs. And I pivoted and ended up doing other things that were just as fulfilling. So whilst I thought that this was sort of the end of this fabulous journey that I was on, actually, I just went down a different path, which was equally exciting and fulfilling.
So are you going to, and I can't quite bring myself to that, but it was the one door closing, another door. I mean, what were the learning? I mean, were there some particular insights? You just thought, right, I've got to remember that. I've got to remember that this happens and there are always possibilities. What was it, do you feel, that you took from that experience?
I think three things. One, never work in an environment where you're not aligned in terms of values.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, even though it was absolutely the right thing to do, because I knew I could not be successful and true to myself if I'd stayed with a philosophy that was just different to the philosophy that I joined.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I think knowing that one is never indispensable. However well one is doing in a role, actually always be replaced, and slightly kind of get over yourself. And thirdly is that you take with you into your next role all of the great stuff and the less great stuff, and it just makes you a more rounded and better leader.
Yeah, that's great wisdom there. Thank you. And I think we'll come back to the get over yourself advice. I think that there's all sorts of contrasts, isn't there, that can whirl around in all of us. But really great wisdom. Thank you very much for that. And also thank you for the honesty and openness too. Miri, can I come to you? Highest points and lowest points, learnings? Again, if we can keep the...
Yes. And when I look back now, and I don't think I necessarily would have recognised this as the high point, but when I got my job at what was SG Warburg and it later became UBS, and I was only in my mid-20s or so, that actually was a real high point for me. I frankly hadn't expected to get it. They were an organisation, I thought they'd never employ somebody like me, and they did. And I spent 13 years there, and it was pretty tough. It was a tough environment, it was a demanding environment, but the opportunity for learning and for being stretched and for doing things that you didn't think you were capable of doing was quite extraordinary. And in many ways, that was the formative time of my career. And it really did. I did learn that there was a lot more that I could do and I could be pushed to do and I was capable of doing that I ever thought possible. So when I look back now, that was a real high. And I'm very, very grateful to the people who took me on, because I wasn't a particularly conventional person for them to take on. I was probably reasonably high risk, and they took the risk. And many of them, a large number of them, have become and have stayed very good friends over the years. And that's another high, a constant high of my career, is I've made good friends in every job I've been in. And they've often been people I've been friends with when I've been in my job. And then when I've moved, they've become really good friends. And when I look back, I have been lucky in that I've had this career and I've made a lot of friends along the way, and they've remained good friends. And I think that's a really important part of your career is the opportunity to make friends. I don't think your work life and your home life, your personal life, your life away from work are that different and that separate. I don't think they can be that separate. You probably spend more of your waking hours at work than you do at anything else.
It's a really interesting, that's a really interesting one, isn't it, about the work and life relationship, because I guess, work is a part of life. It makes it, we spend a lot of our time at work, don't we? And I think that the insight about making friends and keeping them and frankly having as good relationships as one possibly can in all the roles that you've got. Yeah. Seems obvious, but nevertheless it's really crucial, isn't it? Yeah,
I think it is really crucial. And then in terms of lows, the low came when I stayed in a job for a bit too long, and I should have recognized it, and I didn't recognize it. And the reason I didn't recognize it was I was absolutely exhausted. I was working full on. We were very, very, very busy. I was very tired, and I should have said, I've learned everything I'm going to learn in this job. It's been great fun, but it's time to move on. And I just didn't take the time out to think. And I did leave probably about 2 years after I should have done, but I should have gone 2 years earlier. And I think that's another point, is to know when is the right time to go, and to know when you've learned everything you're going to learn and it's time to move on and go and try something different. And it was a low because I was just utterly exhausted, and I was exhausted at work, but I was also exhausted at home because, you were just too tired to function. And I wouldn't get myself into that position again, and that was a low.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that's something that will resonate again for many people on this call, is burnout and the impact that can have. I think the other thing that you said about doing things that you didn't think you were capable of doing, I think for a lot of us, sometimes it takes someone else to tell us what we can do because you don't necessarily have that belief in yourself. And I think that again may be something we can talk about later. Thank you very much for that. Hannah, if I can come to you, please. Highest points, lowest points?
Yeah, I think the big high and the low in my very short career compared to everybody else in this call is when I changed job. So in my first startup role, I found the pure focus, profit-driven attitude very unethical, and I couldn't resonate with what everybody else was driving in the role. So the company culture was also a bit toxic and rude. And in one occasion, I actually cried in the ladies' room, echoing Susanna's exit. So within a week, I resigned without a lineup job. And that was a big relief, actually. So, and it's so important, I think, that you stay true to yourself and dare to say no when you need to say no, and to say no to a culture that doesn't really fit you. Even it was my first job, so even it's your first job, I would recommend people to say no if they don't feel comfortable in their job. And the high point was when I joined Bloom & Wild, not marketing my company here, but I was finally working with like-minded people that are compassionate and kind. So yeah, and the journey goes on.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to hear that Bloom & Wild is compassionate and kind. I think that enables us to carry on buying with great conscience. Lovely insights there. Saying no, rejecting toxic cultures. And actually, again, the crying thing is a really interesting thing, because I guess that signals also intensity of emotion that we can all feel about some of the roles, which in some ways is actually, I guess, positive, but it can just create sort of deep upset. Although actually it's interesting, sometimes when people talk about women are emotional and guys are less so. I mean, actually guys just show it in different ways. It's often occurred to me, but anyway, back to that later. Thank you so much. Pam, highest points, lowest points, insights?
Well, there've been loads of high points, and I think I'm going to say two things about high points. One is that I am so thrilled if I go anywhere and either find a castle that I've been involved with or a housing estate that I've known, and I feel the teams I've been with have done something to make that better than it was before. But actually the high point for me over the last 20 years has been becoming a Newnham associate at the beginning of the century, having 10 years as an associate and getting so much more involved with the college that I then joined the roll committee. And for me, the high point of my engagement with Newnham really was our TEDx Newnham in 2018, which was just so exciting. I think we were trending number 3 on Twitter by the end of it. We were engaging Newnhamites all around the world, as I know this festival is doing. So actually that's been fabulous. And at my 60th birthday, there were more Newnham associates than there were people I'd been at Newnham with who were invited. The low points for me are all the same ones as everyone else, leaving a job. I was made redundant 3 times. I was basically sacked from the job I loved most at the Housing Corporation. The pretense was I could apply for my role, and I made the huge mistake of doing so when it was perfectly obvious the chief executive wanted me out. And what I learned from that was the whole of the housing world told him how stupid he was. And it is, some people will say don't take these things personally, but they are intensely personal. And the thing is to work out how you can deal with it and not survive it, but thrive through it. And for me, that was about the other people who reminded me what they valued in me. The second time it happened was totally devastating. And like Mihiri, I was just too exhausted to do a good job and realised I wasn't doing it for the new chairman who wanted something completely different. And the third time, even though it was the abolition of the RDAs, I went before the end, and that was actually my choice, but it wasn't, the choice was taken out of my control. And I think one of the reasons these things feel so personal is you lose control. And for me, some of the lessons are about the people again. Really, really take the good stuff from the people who tell you they'll miss you, even though, of course, you're not indispensable. I have a book of the exit from English Heritage, and if I feel really down, I go and look at some of the things that the people who I rated so highly felt I'd help them with, and that's the best for me. Don't be unhappy about it, because if you hate people, it's you that suffers, not them. And make your leaving something everyone can feel good about, because it doesn't help anybody to feel rotten for you. And for me, that was what I learned at the Housing Corporation, and I hope I applied to my later roles. So don't survive, thrive. I would never have been Chief Executive of English Heritage if I hadn't been thrown out of the Housing Corporation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Pam, for sharing that. And also, I think that's similar to some of the lessons that Susanna was saying, that actually something always happens. If you've got the right heart, the right motivation, something happens. Don't stay in toxic cultures, get yourself out and put your efforts where they're really valued. And this
Can I say just another word about that? Because you got it absolutely right. You said, you won't know, I can't remember what you said, but it was, what happened to me was I walked across the House of Commons central lobby, bumped into the man who ran the House of Commons. He said, "How are you?" I said, "I've just lost my job." He said, "Don't be ridiculous." I said, "Yeah, I have." And he said, "Come into my room, little girl." Effectively, he had a terrible reputation. And he'd just been asked if he could find a new chief executive for English Heritage. And I said, "I don't know anything about the Heritage. Couldn't possibly be its chief executive." And 6 months later, I was.
Amazing. And actually, I think the other thing is about making friends and supporters, the importance of making friends and supporters and leaving in a way that leaves a good legacy, and trying to help people be brilliant and feel good about what they're doing and also about you. I think there are some really great insights there. Thank you so much. And actually on that, I know I mentioned Jacinta Ardern as a sort of my biggest girl crush at the moment, but in terms of other people that we've come across over the years, I mean, whether they've been in close proximity or otherwise observation, any particular people that you've admired along the way and why that was? Maybe I could come, Hanlin, to you first this time.
I really admire the person that I actually work with, Aaron Galbart, the CEO of Bloom & Wild again. And also from the book, there was another CEO whose name is Bob Iger, the ex-CEO of Disney, that I admire a lot. After reading his book, The Ride of a Lifetime, they both share the same values that I deeply believe in, which are kindness, empathy, and integrity. So I think Bob Iger actually says in his book that if you approach people with respect and empathy, the impossible can become possible. So I believe that is so true, and I would highly recommend this book to for anybody who want to learn more about him. But in Bloom & Wild, I have seen Aaron channeling kindness and care in customer service, people, and across businesses, even with the competitors. So as a current leader at the start of COVID, Aaron made a decision to request everyone to work from home a week ahead of Boris Johnson's announcement. And in the past year, Bloom & Wild launched the thoughtful marketing movement by proactively letting customers to opt out from sensitive occasions such as Mother's Day, Father's Day, emails. So we shared how we execute this with other companies as well, to ask them to join us to be more thoughtful to customers. So as a business, of course, profits are important, but nowadays with customers spoiled by so many choices, it's increasingly important to be a business that drives social impact and based on this solid foundation of kindness.
Lovely. Thank you very much. It's kindness and empathy and integrity. And actually, the great thing, I guess, now in business is that people have realized that nastiness is very expensive and damaging and toxic, not only in the short term, but you lose talent. And frankly, you can't be horrid anymore and not let people find out about it. It's in a digital world, everything gets to the outside world. So anyway, very good. Thank you very much. Susanna, are people you've admired over time?
Yeah, this is a hard one because there are just so many people. I mean, I've been so fortunate with the people that I've worked with and who I've met through work. So I suppose two. One, actually at Newnham. So Jean Gooder was my director of studies, and she still inspires me just in terms of she never let me be anything other than the best version of myself, and just graciously, quietly, but insistently. And so I think that really formed how my attitude of how I go about anything now. The other person, way more recently, is an amazing woman, the founder and CEO of Acumen, Jacqueline Novakratz. And if you don't know Acumen, they're an incredible social enterprise organization who are completely rethinking the way in which we tackle poverty. And I had the great privilege of meeting her, but then also interviewing her in our Extraordinary Leaders series, which is a series of webinars that the foundation runs. And if you haven't read her book, she's written a fantastic book called The Moral Revolution. And it really is about how we can have purpose and profit together. So all of these things which we've traditionally thought of one or the other, they're sort of adding the ampersand back to these things. And she is absolutely the epitome of warmth and kindness and empathy, but in a completely focused, we are going to make change happen way. So yeah, I find her completely inspiring.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. And Pam, do you have some top of the pops here?
Well, again, I was going to go back to my director of studies, so I will. I made the commemoration dinner speech back at the end of the 90s, and Lucy Adrian said, you should not have been worrying about the fact that Shirley Williams might have been on the top table. Honora O'Neill was there. But she also said, you were true to your discipline. And for me, that really really resonated and made me realize that I'm a geographer and everything I do is about love of place. And I really hadn't quite got that before. I'd done all sorts of things about the built environment, but I hadn't really understood why. And then Honora herself and everything she says about trust and how what we really need to worry about is trustworthiness. And this morning she said she has a new book out about digital technology and the ethics. I just feel everything that she does is so important for today. But two non-Unamites, it's quite hard, you see, because if you're as old as I am, most of the people that you admired during your career were men, because that's who was at the top. But two women I'm hugely admire at the moment are Mariana Matsukatu, who is a professor at UCL, who is really reinventing the way we think about the economy and innovation, going beyond GDP to thinking about what well-being is all about and how we measure it, how we achieve it. And Caroline Criado-Perez, who is lifting the veil on so many things that are wrong about a male-dominated approach to the world we live in, and who is doing some great stuff for progress, the reality for women to be better. And I think her work is fascinating.
Fantastic, and great to hear about the broader measures of well-being rather than the limitations of GDP. That's a very important wider conversation, isn't it? Thank you very much. And Mary, do you have some different people that you've admired?
I do. So first of all, I'd like to start with a couple from my Newnham days, and I was thinking about who I admired before coming onto this event, and I'm not sure I would have thought about it in this way, but I do think about it now. And they are Claire Barlow and Irina Kurinova. And they were both, Claire Barlow was my, I was a natural scientist, and I did material science and metallurgy or crystallography, I think it was called, in my first year. And she was just wonderful to me. She was incredibly kind. And that's what I really remember about Claire. I actually don't remember most of the crystallography, but I do remember her kindness. And she just listened. You know, when you think back now, I don't think I understood when I was at Newnham how much the fellows and the academics cared about the students. I mean, you sort of sensed it, but I don't think you realised how much they genuinely wanted our experience to be as good and as happy as it could be. And they went out of their way to achieve that. And in the same vein, Miss Kurinova, she would always be to me. And I was a natural scientist, she's a linguist, so she didn't teach me, but she was my tutor. And I was a bit overwhelmed in my first term, as many people are. And I went to see her at the end of term to have my discussion with my tutor. And she just said to me, look, what you need to do is go home and go to sleep for 5 days. And frankly, it was just the kindness of saying that and understanding that, and just the sort of downplaying of the overwhelmingness of Cambridge and the overwhelmingness of being at university and away from home for the first time. And her really saying to me, you don't have to be perfect. It's enough to find things. It's fine that you find these things overwhelming, because they are overwhelming. And you know, when I look back, those are the things I remember now, many, many, many years ago. But you never forget that kindness. No. In the business world, I would, someone I've never met, but I absolutely would put up there is Steve Shirley. And I don't know if you know, but she's actually Stephanie Shirley, Dame Stephanie Shirley. Yes. She calls herself Steve because in the 60s, she's a software engineer. She couldn't get into any clients if she called herself Stephanie. So she called herself Steve, so people thought she was a man. She is absolutely incredible. I've never met her. I've read her book. I've seen her on TV and on radio. She was born in Germany. She came over to the UK as a child when young German children came over just before the war. I don't think she ever met her birth family again. She then set up a software company, which was an absolute man's world. She made a huge success of it. And she also faced some real challenges in her personal life, which now she has turned into her charitable foundation. And it's doing an enormous amount of good for people for whom life is not always easy. I just think she is, you know, in every part of her life, she has absolutely shown resilience and compassion and kindness, and I just think she's incredible.
So, and I don't know whether the other panelists or indeed people on this call have read Dame Stephanie Shirley's, but if you haven't, it's absolutely compelling and must-read stuff. So it is, it's an extraordinary story, and she is extraordinary. So we have one more question, and then I'm just going to open it up to anyone who'd like to ask me questions. If you could please put it in the chat, and the questions will be picked up. So if you do have any questions, will come after this one. And in fact, actually, we've had some great comments on that. Sort of people being like, this thing about you don't have to be perfect just brings me on to the next question, which is imposter syndrome. I mean, I've heard this so often from people in business and, you know, in the arts and indeed everything else. 70% of people say that they experience imposter syndrome. That goes up to 90% in the creative industries, etc. In fact, without wanting to do a shameless book plug, I heard it so often. I did a book that I launched last year called Love Your Imposter, just sharing some insights about people, what caused it, and some of the tips and tools that have helped people through that. People like Hillary Clinton, our very own Dame Mary Beard has also talked about experiencing imposter syndrome. Tom Hanks, if you have had it, then you are in very good company. So if I could please ask our panelists, maybe Mary, I can come to you first of all. So what's been your experience of imposter syndrome, and have you got any tips? And again, if we could keep these responses quite short, just to make sure that we can answer any questions that come from people on the call, that would be great. Mary, imposter syndrome, yes?
Yes, I think that an awful lot of people suffer from this. They don't talk about it early on in their careers, but actually afterwards, everybody comes out and says it. And I mentioned that I stayed friends with lots of people after I left work, and it's after I left work that they all came out. And this is men as well as women, and they all say, you know, I never really thought I was good enough at it, and I always thought I was kind of pretending I was good enough at it, and everybody could see I wasn't. But actually, my view on imposter syndrome now is you're not going to get over it. Almost everybody, it seems to me, suffers from it. And I don't think it's anything you need to get over. I don't think it's a weakness or a shortcoming. And often it means that you will actually work that bit harder, you'll be on top of your game. But my feeling about imposter syndrome is, I think that your book title is absolutely right, Rita. Learn to love it, learn to accept it. There's nothing wrong with you. And just recognize probably everybody else in the room or the Zoom call or whatever it is that you're on at the time is feeling the same way that you do. They're just not showing it. And they're looking at you thinking, she hasn't got it because she just looks totally in charge and totally together and totally with it. So don't worry about it, is my view on imposter syndrome.
Brilliant. Thank you. Frankly, so many people seem to experience that it ceases to be a syndrome and just starts being a part of the human condition. And in fact, it gives you empathy with other people. Thank you very much. If I can come to you, Pam, now, something you've experienced in your life?
Always, I still do, even walking into a drinks party. And I think that's because it's about what other people think of you. And you have to have a really strong core or different personality than mine anyway, if you don't care what other people think of you. And I think because we've been at Newnham, because we've been at Cambridge, because we've done the jobs we do, we are perfectionists. A friend of mine said the other day when I was saying I really wanted a piano teacher again because I was never going to play unless I had someone that I had to please. And she said, well, of course we have to please our teachers because it would be completely impossible to please ourselves. And it is only ourselves we're doing it to. So I think that's the point. I think it is something to worry about because it drives you to perfectionism. And that doesn't help anybody really. Learn to know that sometimes good enough really is good enough. And it's good enough to walk into a drinks party because you got invited.
Fantastic. I think I remember hearing Olivia Colman, award-winning actress, talks about every time she goes on set, she thinks she's going to get fired. And actually, she's learned to live with that because actually it spurs her on to greater performance and things like that. So interesting stuff. Hanlin, is that something you've experienced in your quite short career so far?
actually, as a student, so I was so unsure, so confused, like maybe the most confused student ever at Newnham in my first 2 years. And so I was watching a lot of TED Talks at that time, and there was one video called "Fake It Till You Make It," and it's about how women, some tend to make them feel smaller in a room, and compared to men, when they tend to occupy the room, be the alpha male. So I think that just like clicked for me, because I think so from then on, I started to pay attention to how I express myself, how I talk, how I speak, and to sort of overcome that imposter syndrome. Whenever in a coursework, a project, or an interview, I think that really helped. And every time I just stop myself from worrying about outcome and put myself forward, as all the other male students would do. And usually things work out when I really want to. And I always tell myself, if it does not, I still learn from it for my next success.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you put yourself into that mindset almost. Yeah. I happen not to like the fake it till you make it advice, because sometimes it encourages people to think about themselves as sort of the third party construct, whereas actually learning tools and techniques, as you've said, about confidence and posture and voice and visual, these are ways, aren't they, of projecting yourself in the sort of the positive way. Thank you very much. And Susanna, imposter, has your imposter stalked you in your life?
Not stalking, but I can absolutely remember a time. I was 29, in fact, and Lord Laidlaw had just asked me to be the president of an employment law training company he'd bought in California. I'd never run a company before. I knew absolutely nothing about employment law. And we'd flown over to do a big town hall meeting so he could introduce me to the company. And just before we started, he turned to me and said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "Yes, I'm absolutely terrified." And then thought, oh, that probably wasn't the smartest thing to say. But he looked at me and said, "Good. I've just spent millions on this company. I'd really hate for you to mess it up." And it just taught me more than anything that it's absolutely fine to be afraid, because it makes you realize that the scale of the challenge, and it helps you to sort of stretch yourself. So I really think imposter syndrome is just a terrible phrase, because we should recognize that we don't have all the answers. And in that recognition, it's just the starting point of a growth mindset. So instead of being scared of the fear, I think we should actually celebrate it, because it's the only way that it really helps us grow. All of that said, I spent about 10 years reporting to Lord Laidlaw, where before every meeting I would practice. I was so sure I would be fired. I would practice saying, "That's absolutely fine. May I have a year's severance, please?"
Actually, sometimes it's quite good to rehearse that discussion. It might be quite good to rehearse that discussion from time to time, mustn't it? But that wonderful thing about it is okay to be nervous. In fact, you can harness that as a drive. Thank you, and thanks very much for the openness that we discussed that. We've got some questions coming in. I'm just going to rattle off a few questions, then whoever would like to pick those up, and then we're just going to come back with a couple of minutes to go to do the "if I could tell you one thing." So I've got a question here about one of the worst things that's happened. This is from Elizabeth Dobson, was having to sack one of my department, and wondered if any of the panelists have any insights on how best to address that, how to sack people nicely. Would anyone like to volunteer for that one? Who's had to sack someone nicely? Susanna?
It's horrible, right? There is no way to do it nicely. The best advice I can give there is probably try and ensure that you've had conversations early enough that they recognize it's not the right place and that they resign. So much better for the person involved to keep their dignity intact if they can be the ones who come to you and say, "I don't think this is working out," or "I've got a better offer," or whatever. All of that said, if somehow, despite the hints and the direction and nudges they still haven't quite realized, and you have to encourage them that it's time for them to go help another company. I think being really clear and honest is important, because if you try and sort of fudge your way around it, or try and say that, you know, it's the situation, it's not that, it just gets messy. So I think you just have to be incredibly clear, explain.
Nice and clear and honest, as you say, and actually this is the better thing, and actually one can be kind sometimes by encouraging people. Thank you very much indeed. How do you get, I'm going to come to you on this one, Pam, how do you get a business to recognize the value of mistakes? It's interesting, isn't it, how sometimes, you know, if you've made a mistake you feel as though your life is over. So anything on that, Pam?
I think that's a really good question, because I guess I try to learn from everything, and it took me quite a long time to realize that sometimes if your team feels bad, that just seems like blame. It doesn't seem like learning. So I think the thing about mistakes is to understand about how you're going to go forward first, so people can start feeling constructive, and then make sure that you've understood how the mistake got made. If it was just a mistake, it was a mistake. But is there anything systemic about it that you really need to address? I think that's the important thing. And in a way, following on from Susanna's points, never ever make it about personality, because if you take people's personality apart, you take something huge away from them that's really hard to get over. And quite often in business, personality is the problem. But in a way, that's your problem, and you're the one in power, so you have to deal with that. Yeah. You should never, ever make people feel that it's because of who they are, rather than what they've done, that there's a mistake that's been made.
Fantastic. That also reminds me about children. You know, when we're told to say, you shouldn't say to a child you're naughty, but rather say that was a naughty thing that you did.
I think I'd been a dreadful mother.
I'm not sure I always remember to do that, by the way, with my children. But anyway, so there we are. Now, this might be a question that Hanlin could answer. What would be your advice for new Newnham graduate? This is from who has been in their first job for a year or so and is deciding on their next steps, getting the courage to ask for a promotion or go elsewhere. The options seem dizzy, endless sometimes. I'm going to go and rehearse dizzyingly. Yeah. Okay.
I can try to answer that one. Yeah, so I did change job only a couple of times so far, and every time so there was a very good advice from the HR lady that I worked with in the fintech company. She said, never be afraid to ask more than ask what you deserve. Always be daring, and if the job is 30K, ask for 50K, 60K, 70K. Just always, always look up. Never look down on yourself. And if you're ready to move on. Always there to make that decision, I would say.
Great. I love that. Always look up. Thank you very much. I'm going to have one more. Maybe this is a question for Mary, if you could answer this. So, how much of your success has been due to your hard work, and how much due to a bit of luck?
I think luck is a massive factor in everybody's career, and hard work plays a part. Being in the right place at the right time plays a part. Having people who give you opportunities to play a part. But I do think luck is a huge factor. And I think it's always worth remembering that if your career is going well, it's often down to you, obviously, but it's also down to luck. And if your career is not going well, it's not your fault, actually. And I think if you can just have that sense of balance, it makes you more humble. It makes you more accepting when you see other people's careers and they're struggling. And it also means you don't get a bit above yourself when things are going well. So it seems to me luck is a huge factor. I do think what you can do, you can't necessarily influence your own luck. You can help other people be lucky. You can with the people that you mentor, and you'll mentor a lot of people in your career, informally and formally. You can just help them, nudge them, give them some good advice, push an opportunity in their direction, help them along, and the luck will come back to you. But I think luck is a huge factor.
I love that. What goes around comes around. It's like there's a golf player who used to say, the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Yes.
So that's...
I was going to say that, because the old saying in Chinese as well, like you work harder, the luckier you get.
And in English, they say luck is a combination of preparation and opportunity.
Exactly.
There we are. That fantastic collection of wisdom there. Now we're actually out of time, just about. There were just a couple of things. People asked, anything we do in our daily lives, like rituals or habits? I'm sure we've all got some. I just like to do a recommendation for Bark's rescue remedy, in case anybody else. I don't know if anyone else uses that. It can be quite a useful tool. Deep breathing, yoga breathing, a lot of these things. And someone talking about balancing niceness. I hope that the person who'd asked about implementing compassion and being friendly to everyone without being taken advantage of, I hope what you've heard on this panel is kindness and empathy are the things that win and build long-term successful businesses. Nastiness is expensive, and what's more, you leak talent. So anyway, the kindness economy. Thank you so much. Can I just ask for one sentence, literally from everybody, if I could tell you one thing on this panel to everyone listening, if I could tell you one thing, can I come to you, Pam, first of all, for your sentence?
Yeah, follow your passion. And I use Headspace. And today it says, even if you're not quite where you want to be proud of how far you've come.
That's fantastically wise. Thank you. Mary, what's your, if I could tell you one thing, sentence?
It's make friends at work. Choose a workplace where you're going to make friends. It's just as important as all the career opportunities is the opportunity to make friends.
Make friends. Thank you very much. Hanlon?
Yeah, so there, always there. So it's actually written in red neon lights on the wall of Old Vic Theatre. You can tell that I'm a keen theatre goer. So it strikes me that this has always been the exactly driving force of my career and life. There to have children, there to have a family, there to change job, there, always there.
Brilliant. Be there. Thank you very much. That's terrific. And Susanna, a sentence from you?
Do things that scare you at least a little. It will keep you learning and finding life interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think I might just add, be yourself, because you'll never be quite as good at being someone else. So, but just be your best self. I think that's the only thing. Thank you so much. Fantastic panel, great discussion. It just leaves me then to say a huge thanks to all of our panelists, to Shah, who organised this, to Peter for all the technical stuff, for everyone who joined this call, and also for your questions. And I think really from all of us, here is to the next fabulous 150 years of Newnham. It's done so much for us all. So huge thank you all round, and hope to see everyone again in real life sometime. Thank you so much.